want to begin with something honest about the title of this video, because the title promises something that Gabor Maté would have immediately complicated. Not dismissed, complicated. With the specific, careful, genuinely important distinction that he brought to every conversation that touched the relationship between self-reliance and genuine healing. He would have said, the goal of healing yourself without depending on anyone is a worthy aspiration in one sense, and a deeply problematic one in another. And understanding which sense is which, understanding precisely where genuine self-directed healing begins, and where the myth of complete self-sufficiency becomes itself a wound seeking to protect itself through the language of independence. That understanding is the most important thing this conversation can offer. Because many people who are drawn to the idea of healing without depending on anyone are not drawn to it from a position of genuine self-sufficiency. They are drawn to it from a position of specific, understandable, entirely predictable, learned mistrust of the possibility of being genuinely supported. The child who needed support and did not consistently receive it learns something about dependency that the adult carries forward, the specific, embodied, nervous system level conclusion that depending on others is either not safe or not available or both. And that conclusion produces in adult life a specific orientation towards self-reliance that looks like strength from the outside and is from the inside often the most sophisticated and most costly expression of the original wound. So this video is going to give you what the title promises, the genuine, practical, honestly grounded account of what you can do yourself in your own interior life, in the daily ordinary moments of your own experience, to move toward genuine healing, without requiring any specific external support to begin. And it is also going to be honest about something the title does not say, that the fullest and most durable healing is almost always, eventually, relational. Not because you are inadequate without others, but because the human nervous system was formed in relationship and continues to require genuine relational experience for its deepest processes of integration and genuine change. Both of these things are true simultaneously, and holding both, rather than reaching for the comfort of either the self-sufficient extreme or the dependent extreme, is itself part of the genuine healing this conversation is about. If something in that honesty already feels important, if you recognize yourself in the description of someone drawn to independence from a wound rather than from genuine wholeness, drop 11 in the comments right now. 11, the number of the one who's willing to look at what is actually driving the seeking rather than simply following it. When you type 11, you're saying, I'm willing to be honest about this, even the parts that are uncomfortable. Type 11, and let us go into the genuine work together. The first and most foundational thing Gabor Maté understood about self-directed healing is this. It begins not with doing anything differently, but with seeing something honestly, specifically with seeing the wound honestly. Not the story about the wound, the narrative that the conscious mind is constructed around the difficult experiences, the explanation that locates the difficulty in specific events or specific people or specific circumstances, but the wound itself, the specific, interior, felt, bodily, present reality of what the experiences produced in the nervous system of the person who lived through them. This distinction between the story and the wound is not subtle. It is one of the most practically significant distinctions available in genuine healing work. The story can be told indefinitely without producing genuine healing, because the story is organized by the conscious mind, and the conscious mind's primary concern is coherence rather than genuine integration. The wound is held in the body, in the nervous system, in a specific felt quality of contraction or activation or numbness that arises in particular contexts, and that has been present below the surface of the story since before the story was assembled. Self-directed healing begins with the development of genuine capacity to turn toward the wound, not the story about it, but the actual felt quality of it, with honest, patient, non-judgmental attention. Not to fix it, not to resolve it, simply to be genuinely present to it, to allow it to be what it actually is, rather than what the story has decided it is, for long enough that it can begin to reveal its actual nature, rather than the nature the narrative is assigned to it. This is the beginning of what Gabor Maté called compassionate inquiry directed inward, the specific quality of attention that asks not what happened to me, but what is actually present in me right now, in this body, in this nervous system, in this specific quality of interior experience that arises when particular triggers are present. The second thing self-directed healing requires is the development of what Gabor Maté identified as the single most important and most consistently underdeveloped capacity in people whose early environments produce significant wounding: the capacity to regulate the nervous system from within. The person whose early relational environment was characterized by inconsistency or unavailability, or the specific quality of emotional absence that produces chronic low-grade dysregulation, did not develop adequate internal regulatory capacity. Because internal regulatory capacity develops through core regulation, through the repeated experience of a dysregulated nervous system being brought back to baseline through the genuine, attuned, responsive presence of another regulated nervous system. The child whose distress was consistently met with the calm, attuned, genuinely present regulation of a caregiver develops robust internal regulatory capacity over time. The child whose distress was met with anxiety or absence, or the specific quality of dysregulated response that amplifies rather than soothes the child's own dysregulation, that child's internal regulatory capacity is to varying degrees underdeveloped. And underdeveloped internal regulatory capacity is one of the most significant contributors to the adult experience of being overwhelmed by emotional states that seem disproportionate to the circumstances, of being flooded by feelings that the rational mind knows are not warranted by the present situation, but that the nervous system generates anyway, with the full force of years of unprocessed activation seeking completion. Developing this capacity in adult life without the relational core regulation that ideally would have built it in childhood is possible. It is slower than the childhood process. It requires more conscious effort, but it is genuine, and it produces real and lasting change in the nervous system's ability to return to baseline from activated states. The practical work of building internal regulatory capacity begins with the body, with the development of genuine, honest, non-managed attention to physical sensation, not the interpretation of sensation, not the narrative about what the sensation means, but the sensation itself, the breath, the quality of tension or ease in specific locations, the specific felt texture of an emotional state before the mind has had time to convert it into a story. This attention, daily, brief, consistent, gradually builds the nervous system's capacity to tolerate its own activated states without being entirely governed by them. Not through suppression, through genuine presence. The paradox that every genuine healing tradition has eventually arrived at is that the capacity to regulate difficult emotional states is built not by avoiding them, but by being genuinely, fully, safely present to them. The nervous system that learns through repeated experience that it can be in a difficult state and survive it without being destroyed, that nervous system gradually, genuinely develops greater capacity to tolerate and eventually integrate what previously overwhelmed it. The third thing self-directed healing requires is honest engagement with the shadow, the specific personal material that has been sealed away from conscious awareness because the early environment communicated, in whatever way it communicated, that this particular quality or feeling or impulse was not safe to express. We have explored this territory in detail in previous conversations. But in the context of self-directed healing, it deserves specific attention, because the shadow is one of the most consistent sources of the patterns that people most want to heal. The self-sabotage, the reactive patterns in relationships, the specific behaviors that arrive without conscious intention and that persist despite genuine desire to change them. The self-directed work with the shadow does not require a therapist. It requires honesty. The specific, daily, consistently practiced willingness to notice the shadow's signals, the disproportionate reactions, the harsh judgments toward others, the inability to receive care without immediately redirecting it, and to bring to those signals the quality of genuine, curious attention that asks not what is wrong with me, but what is this protecting? That question, asked honestly, without the demand that it produce an immediate answer, with the genuine patience of someone who understands that the shadow's material surfaces gradually rather than all at once, is the foundation of genuine self-directed shadow work. The fourth thing self-directed healing requires is the development of genuine self-compassion. Not as a concept or a practice performed at designated times, as a daily, ordinary, consistently applied quality of relationship with your own interior experience. Gabor Maté was specific about what genuine self-compassion actually is, because it is so frequently confused with its substitutes. It is not the performance of kindness toward yourself. It is not the replacement of harsh self-talk with affirmations the nervous system does not yet believe. It is not the spiritual bypass of genuine difficulty to the vocabulary of self-love. It is the specific, honest, genuine quality of meeting your own experience, including its most difficult, most confusing, most apparently inadequate aspects, with the same quality of patient, non-judgmental, genuinely curious presence that you would offer to a person you deeply loved who was in the same difficulty. That quality of presence, offered to yourself daily, in the ordinary moments of ordinary self-encounter, is what gradually changes the interior atmosphere, not to the force of positive thinking, but to the accumulated experience of the self being treated by the most consistent voice in its life with enough genuine care that the nervous system begins to update its most fundamental assessment of whether it is safe to be fully present to its own experience. The fifth thing self-directed healing requires is the genuine practice of expressing what is genuinely present, even if only to yourself, even if only in writing, even if the expression never reaches another person. Gabor Maté consistently observed that the suppression of authentic emotional expression is one of the most physiologically costly things a human being can do. The chronic, sustained, full-time metabolic expense of keeping what is genuinely present from being expressed produces measurable biological consequences: dysregulated immune function, hormonal disruption, the chronic nervous system activation that eventually produces the full range of stress-related conditions. The self-directed practice of genuine expression through writing, through movement, through creative work, through whatever channel allows the authentic interior experience to have some form of genuine outward expression is not a substitute for relational expression, but it is genuinely valuable in its own right. The material that is expressed, even in private, even without an audience, even in the clumsy, imperfect, not yet articulate form that genuine expression often takes before it finds its actual shape, is material that is no longer being held entirely in the body. And material that is expressed, however imperfectly, is material that can be seen. And material that can be seen can be related to rather than simply endured. The sixth thing self-directed healing requires is patience with a process that does not move at the pace the wound would prefer. The wound wants to be healed quickly. The suffering that comes with unhealed material is genuinely difficult, and the desire for its resolution is entirely understandable. But genuine healing moves at the pace of genuine healing, which is almost always slower than the desire for relief would choose. And one of the most consistent ways that self-directed healing gets undermined is by the urgency that the wound's discomfort generates. The urgency that reaches for faster methods, more dramatic approaches, the promise of rapid transformation that the healing industry so reliably offers in place of the slower, less dramatic, genuinely effective work that lasting change actually requires. The self-directed healer who develops genuine patience with the pace of their own process, who can acknowledge that something is taking longer than was hoped without immediately converting that acknowledgement into a judgment about their own inadequacy or the inadequacy of their approach. That person has developed one of the most practically significant capacities available in genuine self-directed healing. The seventh thing, and this is the one that Gabor Maté considered most essential, the one that brings everything else into its proper relationship, and without which every other element of self-directed healing remains somewhat incomplete. The willingness to accept that genuine healing eventually requires some genuine connection, and to begin, however tentatively, to make room for that. Not dependency, not the abdication of the self-directed work to an external source, but the genuine, honest acknowledgement that the human nervous system was formed in relationship, was wounded in relationship, and heals most completely in relationship. That the self-directed work is genuinely valuable and genuinely necessary, and that it is also, for most people, most complete when it is eventually held within at least one genuine relational context in which honest self-disclosure is possible and genuine, attuned response is available. The person who has been doing genuine self-directed healing work for long enough will eventually encounter the specific limit of what solo work can produce, not because they have failed, because they have succeeded in developing enough genuine interior capacity, enough genuine self-compassion, enough genuine tolerance for their own experience, that the relational context that was previously too threatening to enter becomes increasingly possible to consider. That consideration, the tentative, honest, genuinely personal willingness to begin making room for genuine connection, is not the abandonment of self-directed healing. It is this natural and most important completion. And the privilege of a lifetime, the one that Gabor Maté pointed toward with everything he had, in every clinical encounter and every honest examination of his own interior life. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not the self-sufficient version that needs no one, not the dependent version that cannot function without external support, but who you truly are, the genuine self, already capable of more genuine self-direction than the wound has allowed, already more genuinely worthy of connection than the wound's conclusions about dependency have permitted you to believe. Both of those things are true, and the genuine healing is the one that makes room for both.